I was born and raised in southern Ontario in Canada. My mom suffers from bipolar disorder, postpartum depression, and sometimes she sees or hears things that aren't really there. She had me young, at 17. While my mom was pregnant, she was homeless in Toronto. We couch surfed wherever possible, but for most of my mom's pregnancy, she was eating out of dumpsters. When I turned 1, she introduced me to my father. He was living with his parents still, had a stable job, suffered from no mental health problems at all. Fast forward, I'm about 2, and my mother and father had worked out an agreement that had seemed to be working. My mom was supposed to be taking me camping the May 24 weekend in 2000. It was raining, and I vividly remember that she was angry upon picking me up. We drove for a while until she finally exclaimed that we had arrived. The rain hadn't let up whatsoever, so my mom decided she would go set up the tent alone. She was a Sea Cadet before she was pregnant with me. It was important that I know this for some reason. I think she was just stuck in the past. I watched her set up the tent, and then I scuttled over and she closed it. After we set up the sleeping bags, I realized I didn't have my blankie. This was a huge deal, especially considering my age at the time. I started to panic and cry, but not the ways kids do when they're upset. I had a panic attack. I couldn't breathe and my heart was racing. My mom's response was to scream at me, calling me a spoiled brat and swear. She shouted right in my face over and over. After what felt like an hour of this, she grabbed me roughly, threw me in the car, and packed up the whole campsite. She drove me back to my dad's and didn't come back for 6 months. Many weekends, just like the one previously depicted, took place, and I had learned to deal with the constant physical and psychological abuse. After a while, you get used to it. One weekend, I was about 5 and playing in my mother's room. My mom couldn't stay in one place for long. Her reason varied for the most part, but she would say people were after her. This apartment she lived in was in an elderly woman's basement. Around 12 p.m., the lovely old lady went out with her granddaughter, and it was just me and my mom in the whole house. My mom was in the bathroom for a long time, and when she came out, she looked as though she had been crying. I tried to ask her what was wrong, but she didn't answer me. She didn't even look up at me. She just stared into her hands at the matches she was holding. Because my mom moved every 6 months or so, there were boxes everywhere. My mom pushed all the boxes in front of the door and then started playing with the matches again. My young mind understood what she was doing and somehow kicked the matches out of her hand. I picked them up and threw them out the open window. My mom decided to attack me and called my dad to come get me. As soon as I told my dad what happened, my one-on-one visits with mom stopped. My mom got married to a wonderful man when I was 9 or 10. She really seemed to be getting better. She found God, started going to therapy, started taking the necessary medication to help correct her chemical imbalance, and it seemed like she was a completely different person. She even apologized to me for how she had treated her only daughter in the past, and vowed to be a better mom from her wedding day forward. Before long, they had 2 boys, 18 months apart. Our family was elated. My stepdad was the kind of guy who wanted to help you achieve your wildest dreams. He wanted to make sure everyone felt included and was just a genuine guy all around. Fast forward, I'm 13. On this summer, we went up to visit my grandmother. My mother was pregnant with my 3rd brother, Jackson, and it was a great week overall. At the end of the week, my parents and brother wanted to head home. Being only 13 at the time, I had no responsibilities I had to get back to, and it was decided I could stay another week. When I got home, expecting to see my stepdad and my newly found mom since their marriage, what I found shocked and horrified me. While I was away, my mother decided to put in some extra time at work. She didn't talk to her boss beforehand, and he was unable to pay the difference. This set off a trigger in my mom that she had been suppressing for years. She attacked my stepdad. She went for his masculinity, threw things at him, spit in his face, and basically told him to man up and go get money or else. My stepdad and his father were both hunters. So after his father passed, it was my stepdad who inherited all of his father's things, including many guns. My stepdad took his unloaded .22 caliber hunting rifle to the bar my mom worked at and pointed the gun at my mom's boss. There was a struggle, and my stepdad beat him with the butt of his rifle and then ran off into the night. When I got home from my grandmother's, he was in jail awaiting sentencing. This isn't even the scariest part. While my stepdad was away, I started to feel really lost and depressed. My mom was back in full force, and I was starting to question my existence. Somewhere around the end of July, I tried to take myself out for the first time. After my dad heard about it, he pulled me out of that nightmare. I moved schools, and I made a few new friends, and I started dating. Mostly because a huge piece of me felt missing, so I think I started looking elsewhere for it. My mom started to pick me up every Thursday, and we would go visit my stepdad in prison located in Penetanguishene, Ontario. We would sit on the other side of the glass and talk to him on the payphone-looking thing just like in the movies. During this time, my mom would continuously berate me with verbal assaults, and yet I didn't understand why I was so depressed. Around October 14th, 2013, I tried to off myself for a second time. This time I decided to go with a more radical approach that left me with some questionable bruising around my throat. I did my best to cover them up with makeup, however it drew many questions out of my concerned father, his girlfriend, and my own boyfriend at the time. I kept it to myself and would say something to the degree of, "I'm not sure," or "Don't worry about it, I'm fine." My father assumed my boyfriend was doing things to me and demanded I break up with him, which drove my now ex into a deep depression of his own. He started harming himself as well because of me. As you can imagine, this didn't help my mental state. To try and cheer up my grandparents, my mother's parents, their angels, decided to take our whole family on a Disney cruise. For the first half, I was starting to feel better, and then I started to feel seasick. I was throwing up every day and almost nothing would settle my stomach. My aunt made a joke remark that I was pregnant, and when I got back from the cruise, I started to worry she might be right because the vomiting continued. After New Year's, I took myself to the walk-in clinic nearest to my house, where I discovered I was in fact 12 weeks pregnant. 2 weeks later, I had a miscarriage and couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. For a long time, my mental state made up her birthday, her name, her face, and my fantasy. I couldn't tell anyone about it in fear of getting in trouble, as I was only 14, and I became more depressed. I tried offing myself for a third time, and this time my parents noticed. My mother decided the best thing to do was to kidnap me. She picked me up from school before my last class was over and took me to my house, told me to grab everything, and we left. My mom had no contact with any adults, so she started confiding in me. Everything that happened, she expressed in a dramatic tale of events. She told me people were after us, putting sugar in our gas tank. She claimed our neighbor broke into our house. She told me a long list of things that weren't true. For a few weeks, everything was great, and then my mom started to get abusive again. I told her that I was still afraid of the dark, and she locked me in our closet, the light switch on the outside of the door. She would leave me in there for hours and periodically scratch her fingernails across the door. After she would unlock the door, she would hit me if I made a grumpy face. Sometimes she would slap me awake in the middle of the night just to scream, "Fix your face," in my face and leave my room, always locking me in after. Needless to say, I was living in a nightmare. My stepdad was released from prison sometime in 2014. I'm not sure exactly when, but that's when the real threats came in. People would leave rotting food on our doorstep. One time I found a dead rat wedged in our basement window. It had a stick through its face, so I knew it didn't crawl in and die there by itself. We moved out into the country soon after someone slashed our car tires. My stepdad was different when he got home from prison. He was more irritable and ready to snap over the smallest things. My parents threw me back and forth again a few times, and then I decided to leave. I moved out with my new boyfriend, who was 4 years older when I turned 18, and life started to get better. I decided to reconnect with my parents, and with my dad, it was easy. We started seeing each other on the weekends, and then I decided to try reconnecting with my mom. I thought maybe if it was on my terms, our relationship could be healthier than before. However, I was gravely mistaken. She found out that I was talking with my dad again and said, "You can have a relationship with me or your father, but not both." I retaliated by blocking her number and removing her from my life completely. Just as I felt things were getting better, I started noticing small things being moved about my apartment. My boyfriend asked me one day if I had moved his glasses. He leaves them in our room and they were in the bathroom. I hadn't moved them. I like to leave his things where he keeps them so I don't stress him out when he has to get ready for work. Soon it was doors being left open. I have OCD, and one of my tics is doors being closed. I have to have all of the doors in my home closed, and when I would come home, they would all be standing open. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and heard our apartment door slamming closed. When I went to see what was happening, all the doors in our apartment stood open, except the front door. This made me hysterical, and my boyfriend went to check and see if anyone was still outside. Of course, whoever it was long gone. My mother and stepdad got into a physical fight. He picked her up by the throat door, so she accused. She was sent to the hospital, and my grandmother pressured me to go and check on her, as she lives 8 hours away, and I was the only person left in our family that could be manipulated into visiting my mom. I went. It was terrible, and she made me feel so horrendous and manipulated into bashing my wonderful stepdad. I found myself saying, "You're my mom, and I'll love you regardless." I also caught myself saying, "There's no sides, I'm here for you and my brothers." I left her alone and didn't bother contacting her. Nothing happened for months after this, and then around March 2018, I was walking home and I watched her leave my apartment and walk to her van carrying a bag. Needless to say, I've been locking my door religiously. I'm only frustrated with myself for not doing something as soon as I felt something was off. I've found out recently that she had both of her legs run over by a bobcat. I'm glad karma got to her. I just wish I knew the name of the driver. I'd like to send them a fruit basket.
My friend and I grew up in a sleepy wannabe New Jersey Central Florida town, and we were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade when I overheard her talking to another classmate about bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion. We became fast friends and soon were inseparable. Soon began the gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. We were practically siblings. She was the only person I'd come out to as bisexual, and in turn I was the only person she told about being trans. Her home life was tumultuous, though I can't say mine was any better. We often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became like siblings. Her father was an alcoholic, strict, and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who had gravitated towards the hicks and jocks when we entered high school, and her mother was a pseudo-vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23, herself 22 at the time, we had another long night of sleeping over in order to let her escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart, and I was going in for my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On our drive home the next morning, she excitedly told me that now that she has her own vehicle, she would be applying at pizza places that were in need of a driver. I was proud. It was the first time she'd hunted for a job on her own, as I'd usually been the one to coax her to apply when I was working. Not that she ever lasted very long. My first day of training goes quite well. My coworkers are friendly and try to get me to talk more. My manager likes to playfully embarrass me, a fat white guy, by trying to get me to talk hood to the other coworkers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I had been up early in anticipation as this had been my first day on a job in a few months. I got home at around noon, informed some of my internet friends that my first day went well, and around 5 p.m. I started to bed down, drained from a good day. As I'm preparing to lay in my bed, I get a Steam message. Her lamenting about another fight with her mother and asking if she could come over. Now, I had started to grow a bit weary of the fights on their end. I had begun to repair my relationship with my family and a few friends, and I had given her advice many times on how to better approach things. In my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message on and drifted off into a slumber. Around 8 p.m., I am awakened to her bursting into my room in a panic. Having been ripped from a dream, I was groggy and disoriented. I dragged myself to my bathroom to relieve my bladder and made my way back to my room to find her rocking back and forth on my bed. It was at this time that I noticed she was covered in blood, so I asked what happened. She informs me that she saw someone murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank. In the deepest part of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a little overdramatic? Why didn't she call the police? But this was my best friend. I've known her for over a decade, and we're the only two people in the world we could count on. I suppress it and go inform my sister and my stepfather. My mother had passed the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place, antisocial as always. It was the only way we knew how to handle emotional issues. When I inform my family, they immediately go to the same place I had, though they were far more vocal about it. I offer excuses I knew myself were flimsy and return to the room, phone in hand. I convince her to call the police, and I can hear her explaining the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down it's most likely her father. They send cars over to check on the crime scene and take her in for a statement. I ride with her in the back of the cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as was her father. I have to work the next morning and request to be taken home by a police officer. It takes me a while to go to sleep that morning. The next day at work, I'm quiet, until my manager asks me what had happened. I informed him, but decided to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me she had confessed. Her mother threatened to kick her out for not being able to find a job, and in a rage she had taken a kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer, and I turned to face my monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say is, my best friend confessed to murdering her mother, before hanging up and lying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandmother tells me she took a plea deal for life in prison rather than the death penalty. Part of me wants to contest that, to demand that they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a peaceful and caring woman's shadow. A larger part of me is just glad she's being punished. Natalie, you are my best friend, my sister, and my platonic soulmate. But please, let's never meet again.
My mother is mentally ill. She's diagnosed bipolar and paranoid schizophrenic. That said, she wasn't officially diagnosed until I was 13, which was when the story takes place. Even before this incident, it was clear that she wasn't in her right mind. Her paranoia was religious in nature, and not surprisingly, she was an evangelical Christian. I'm not bashing them, it's just that they can be one of the more extreme versions of Christianity. From all accounts, her illness did not begin until I was 5, around the time that she had lost both parents within a month of each other. My parents got divorced when I was 9, and her illness was so clear that they actually gave my dad custody, which was unusual as the courts tended to favor the mother back then. After the divorce, she took a turn for the worst. She had a large walk-in closet in her new apartment, and she covered the walls and floor to ceiling in scriptures written on construction paper. She called it her prayer closet. We would spend hours in that closet praying. I spent hours locked in that closet as punishment for transgressions, real or imagined. She began to tell me when I was 9 years old that the devil had planned to get me pregnant. I think I can best sum up the situation by comparing her behavior to the behavior of the mother in the movie Carrie. Now on to the actual story. Her visitation had been every other weekend and weeknight on the off weekends. But when I was 12, I was legally able to decide whether I wanted to go over there for the visitation or not, and I had stopped going for regular visitations. I did still see her occasionally and receive phone calls from her, so it wasn't strange when, one Friday night, that technically should have been her weekend, she called me up to beg me to come over. I had already told her that I wasn't going to come and visit that weekend. I had made plans to spend the night with a friend. She begged me repeatedly, telling me that there was something very important that she needed to talk to me about, but I was firm and told her that I had plans with a friend and that I wasn't going to cancel. I said that maybe I would come over the next day, Saturday. She refused to accept no as my answer, and I ended up hanging up on her and eventually had to take the phone off the hook because she kept calling back. The next day we received a call from the local hospital telling us, my dad and I, that we were listed as my mother's next of kin, and that she had been admitted to the psych ward. She wanted us to go to her apartment to pick up some personal items and bring them to her. I said we would. We arrived at her apartment and found a garbage bag sitting outside her door, which was not strange in and of itself. What was a little strange was the picture fragment of me that had apparently fallen out of the bag. That was what made me open the bag. My dad and I were shocked to find that the garbage was full of me. Pictures from albums, school papers, and projects she saved, things that I had made or brought her. As complicated as my relationship had been with her, I was devastated. We went in the apartment and just stared. It was completely trashed, just a larger version of what the trash bag outside had held. Literally everything that had anything to do with me was destroyed and strewn around her whole apartment. There was nothing to do but collect the requested items and wait to see if the doctor at the hospital could shed any light on this bizarre scene. In the process of gathering her things, I found a more current photo of myself, and it was by far the most disturbing thing about the situation. It was a large school photo, and she had scratched my eyes and mouth out. There was also a large knife stuck in the middle of my chest, pinning the picture to the dresser. It was embedded in the wood. We left, and when we arrived at the hospital, we were called in by her attending psych doctor. He explained that she had been brought in by an ambulance the night before after the police had been called by several neighbors, reporting a woman banging on their door and begging them to help her in the name of Jesus because the devil was going to kill her. When the police arrived, they found her praying hysterically, holding a butcher's knife. She had found some random unlocked car and had locked herself in it. The doctor said that she wasn't making a lot of sense when she had arrived, and they had to give her a sedative as well as an antipsychotic. Between what the doctor told us and what my now properly medicated mother told me when I visited with her later, here's what I pieced together. God said that I made a pact with Satan, and if I stole her soul for him, he would have not impregnated me. He told her to perform an exorcism on me. Satan was in my heart, and to release me, she would need to open my heart. But once it was made clear to her that I wasn't coming over that night, an angel had come and instructed her to destroy everything that had anything to do with me. It also told her that in my absence it might be possible to perform the exorcism using a particular picture instead. He told her to destroy the eyes and mouth so that I, and Satan, couldn't see her or speak to her. Then to use the knife to, you guessed it, open my heart. This had made Satan angry, and he sent demons to her apartment, so she had to run out to find help. I'm glad that in the end the incident did actually lead her to help that she so desperately needed.